Good morning, everyone. I'm Juliana Lisi for the Canadian Council for Sustainable Aviation Fuels, and I will be your host today. Thank you for joining us. Today, I'll give you a brief introduction about who C-SAF is, and then we'll go into our speaker's presentation, and we'll leave approximately 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. I ask that you put in your questions in the Q&A box throughout the presentation. So like that, it gives people a chance to upvote, and as well as it'll just give me a chance to see which questions came in first, and I will start with that. We did have also a webinar yesterday in case you missed it. We will be posting that recording on our website if you're interested in that. And I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who registered to both of our webinars. Very much appreciated. And we've had over 100 people, well over 100 people register for both webinars, which is great. I think it shows that there's a lot of interest for SAF in Canada. So I think we can begin with our presentation. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about technologies and certification demystified for SAF. Thanks, Susan. You can move on to the next slide. Okay, and before I begin, I will just ask if someone can let me know if they can see the slides. Okay, great. Thanks for that. Okay, so who is the Canadian Council for Sustainable Aviation Fuels, or C-SAF as we call it? Essentially, back in 2021, the Canadian airline operators noticed that there was no, one point source for SAF in Canada as compared to what they've seen globally. So in February of 2022, they launched C-SAF. And essentially, although we're sponsored by the airlines, we are a nonprofit industry-led organization. And our membership is really composed of companies who we think can further SAF production in Canada. So we have fuel refiners, we have the airports, we have OEMs, we have technology. We've really tried to gather who we think that could basically help us move this forward. So our mission is simple but ambitious. We basically want to get SAF production here in Canada because we feel that we have all the right ingredients to do so. And in June of 2023, we actually released a roadmap stating that we wanted to reach 1 billion liters of SAF production and use in Canada. And in that roadmap, we've laid out which steps we need to take now in order to do so. So how will we do this? Well, one of the main ways that we hope to achieve is through advocacy. Susan, if you could move on to the next slide, please. So we have what we call our SAF policy North Star, and it's basically composed of 4 pillars. So the first one, obviously, reducing aviation emissions. In order for aviation to reach net zero goals by 2050, we really need to use SAF, and industry reports have said that at least 65% of emissions will be reduced through the use of SAF. Our second pillar would be obviously to make it here in Canada. We feel that we have all the right ingredients, we have all the right feedstocks in order to make it. Also important is to keep the sector competitive. I'm sure you're well aware that SAF is more expensive than regular jet fuel. It could be 2 to 5 times more. And the airlines obviously don't want to pass on those costs to their consumers. So we want to ensure that any sort of policy revolves around trying to keep the cost competitive. And finally, activating Canadian feedstocks. And that's what was the webinar that we had yesterday about, and if you want to know about all the feedstocks that we have here in Canada that we could have for SAF, you're more than welcome to listen to that recording as well. So that in essence is what we're trying to achieve. And before we go into our presentation, I just wanted to give you a few updates on our website. So I will share my screen. Okay, and I'm assuming that you all can see this. Okay, so we've added a few documents to our website. Our website is c-saf.ca. If you go under our work, so you'll have first there the SAF roadmap, which I mentioned before. You can scroll down and just download it and have a look there. We have it also available in French as well. And then if you go to what we've added is a SAF briefing report. So we've worked on basically a whole bunch of technical briefs that gives you more insight into SAF and all things related SAF with a Canadian context in it. So you can either download all documents. If you scroll down, you provide your information and you can have access to all of the briefs. Or if there's one that interests you more than the others, you can just click on one of the briefs and then you'll have a download the report button here. These will also be available in French. We plan on putting these on our website within the next month. And then finally, we have our economic impact reports. So far, we have a Canadian one that we just developed in July. You can download this one as well. We'll also put an executive summary for this report here so that you get an idea whether you want to read it or not. We will also have one from BC as well, which we plan on posting on our website within the next couple of weeks. And besides these documents, we also have Join the SAF Community link here. This provides you a forum essentially to get connected to people. It puts you on our mailing list. We have news and events posted there, and we have other resources such as, webinars such as today. So I encourage you to look at that as well. Okay, and with that, I think we can move on to our speaker today. Our speaker is Susan Van Dyke. She's an expert in the field of sustainable aviation fuels and biofuels with 18 years experience. Her expertise includes an in-depth understanding of the technologies of SAF production, their potential and challenges, and research and commercialization trends. She is the author and co-author of numerous influential reports focusing on the application of biofuels and SAF in transportation sectors. She has worked on several SAF projects funded by Boeing, and she acts as a reviewer for the US Department of Energy. Other clients include Pratt & Whitney Canada, Deloitte, Sustainable Aviation Futures, ICF, and ourselves, C-SAF. She recently completed a feasibility study in India as a consultant for ICAO. Susan holds a doctorate in biochemistry and a master's degree in law. She works as a consultant and is also a research associate at the University of British Columbia. Welcome, Susan, and you can go ahead and start your presentation.
Thanks, Juliana. So let me just... Today I'm going to talk about production technologies, pathways, and I'm also going to throw in the how certification takes place, and then a little bit about supply chains and how the SAF gets to the airport. So there are numerous technologies. We do have these complicated graphs, but it doesn't even tell the whole story because there's ongoing development of new technologies, and there aren't any winners. We need all technologies to succeed. These are the ASTM approved pathways, and later on I will show you some of the emerging pathways. And I wanted to just speak a little bit about technology readiness and commercialization, because ASTM approval is not an indication of commercial status or the sustainability of a pathway. And what we see is in the SAF sector globally is that it's taking longer for companies to reach commercial status. And we know that it has to progress from R&D, pilot, demo to commercial. But the timeline, I think people overestimate how quickly this can be done. Usually you would take between 2 and 3 years per stage. And then, often reports start counting capacity based on announcements, but the timeline and the complexity in the steps is actually takes much longer. Just as an example, the Fulcrum facility, they already said announced in 2006 or 2008 that they were going to build this facility. So that just gives you an idea. Then apart from getting the funding, etc., going to FID, the construction periods can be very long, especially for facilities such as gasification. So there's also the announcements versus FID. And then we talk about a commercial scale, but we have a difference between a first of a kind facility, the pioneer, and fully commercial, the nth facility. And there is a lot of pressure. So there's the danger of scaling up too fast and commissioning being done too fast. And this could lead to failure of companies. So I think they should be caution about overpromising and then under delivering. If we just look at scale up and these different levels, a first of a kind facility, I do not call it fully commercial because it's still proving the commercial viability. Fully commercial is really at the nth stage where you have a mature standardized operation, and the risk in terms of obtaining financing is also very, very different. And what we also have to bear in mind is that a pathway consists of different processes, and individual process steps may be novel and at different TRL levels. And not only do the individual processes have to be demonstrated, the integration must be demonstrated. And if there's a step that is a lower TRL than others, we would usually assess it at the lower TRL because there's also an integration readiness and a system readiness level that should be evaluated. And I saw this quote the other day, which is very appropriate. And it said, a demo plant proves that the process works in principle. But the first of a kind must prove that it works every hour of every day, and the scale up isn't linear. And sometimes we forget, financiers, venture capitalists, they put a lot of pressure on these companies to do it as fast as possible. And that kind of is something we have to be cautious about. So I'm going to talk a bit about the technologies, but not going to go into a lot of detail. You'll be able to get the slides afterwards. The only technology that's currently fully commercial is the HEFA SPK from oils, fats, and greases. But while we say it's fully commercial, it's mostly for production of renewable diesel, not for SAF. SAF can consist of a small fraction of the products, but not every facility produces SAF. I think I mentioned yesterday that there's about 20 billion liters of global capacity for HEFA refineries, but there's only 1.3 billion liters of SAF produced from that 20 billion liters. There are big challenges with feedstock cost, availability, and sustainability. But what I wanted is just to go into a little bit of detail about why we are producing renewable diesel and how policy fits into this. So the average, and it's quite technical, but I know there's a lot of people with technical backgrounds on the call. So when you look at fats and oils, you have an average of about 18 carbons. Now, if you look at this graph, Here we have carbon number, here we have boiling point range, and here are our 3 different products. So what you can see is that jet fuel sort of fits between these two, but overlaps. So a company makes a decision where to make these boiling point cutoffs. And if a company says, well, it's not worth it to produce jet fuel, they can put the cutoff here. And then this is a diesel fraction. And in fact, the jet fuel range ones will lower the freeze point. So, they choose, they don't have to do it automatically. Now, when we have the oils and fats, there's always a little bit of jet range molecules in there, and a refinery can choose to separate it out. And if there's no cracking, you can get about 15% SAF out. But if you want to produce a bigger volume of SAF, you can crack these molecules to make smaller molecules, and then you will have a bigger jet range. But the traditional thing is that you will then lose about 10% yield, which obviously is, it's only if the economics is favorable that you will do that. And that economic driver will come from the policy, because there's policies all over the world for diesel blending, but not necessarily for SAF. And there are incentives for diesel and renewable diesel blending. And therefore, it's more favorable for companies generally to produce diesel rather than SAF. So I just wanted to clarify that. So HEFA still has a lot of potential, but the challenge is the feedstock. So if we want to make more SAF, the first sort of low-hanging fruit is increase the SAF fraction, bring in policies that address this competition between renewable diesel and SAF so that we can produce bigger SAF volumes. We also have the opportunity for co-processing, which is also a low-hanging fruit. But again, I'll show you with co-processing that it's the refineries in Europe that are producing SAF with co-processing because of the policy environment there. So we have the oils and fats feedstock, but they are very expensive. Used cooking oil has been going even above the price of rapeseed oil, and feedstock cost is about 80% of OPEX. So this feedstock cost therefore presents a challenge in terms of the final production cost. And while we have low carbon intensity feedstocks in waste oils and fats, there's only about 30 to 40 million tons. Plus, there's competition not only with renewable diesel, but also with biodiesel. So we can use crops such as, canola and so on, but there is an opportunity to increase low carbon intensity feedstocks based on cover crops, intermediate crops, such as Camelina carinata, or crops that can grow on marginal or degraded land, which means that there's no ILUC value attached. So co-processing fits in with the HEFA pathway because this is already fully commercial. So basically you take your oils and fats and you can insert it in various places within your refinery, hydrotreater, hydrocracker, or even the fluid catalytic cracker. But you'll remember yesterday when we talked about the CORSIA defaults, there's only a default pathway for the hydrotreater or the hydrocracker, not for the FCC. And currently the ASTM limit for the volume that you can insert is only 5%, unless it's already hydrotreated, and then you can put in up to 24%, but still you only can get 10% in your final fuel. So that's just, and some of the things that come in here from the sustainability perspective is that the biogenic content in the final jet fuel, the final SAF, has to be demonstrated. And while you can use mass balance and so on, CORSIA determines that there has to be carbon-14 analysis built into that to verify the blend. And only the biogenic component is considered SAF. So there's a lot of potential for co-processing because there's a much quicker implementation because the refinery is already there, the processes are already in place. It might just be changing the catalyst, building storage capacity, piping, and maybe pre-treatment capacity. So this is a very quick way to produce SAF. The other reason why it's mainly in the EU is because a lot of facilities in North America have been co-processing for a long time, but at much higher volumes than 5%. So dropping back to 5% is not necessarily an economically viable process. So in Canada, just to link this back to Canada, is that co-processing is extensively carried out in BC at the Parkland refinery, mainly in the FCC, but also a little bit in the hydrotreater. And then the Tidewater midstream facility in Prince George does co-processing. And then a full HEFA facility is the Tidewater Renewables facility in Prince George, but they are only producing renewable diesel. They want to expand to SAF production, and they have not yet gone to FID on that process. Then gasification. So we looked at the feedstocks yesterday, and so gasification is very, very promising in order to utilize a lot of the feedstocks. Here I got forest residues and MSW, but it can also use like ag residues and so on. The basic process is quite known, but what we do know is that gasification is fully commercial for generating heat and energy, and Fischer-Tropsch is fully commercial for producing products from gas, natural gas, and coal, but not from biomass. And so it's that integration that is the problem, because the biomass produces TARs, the syngas cleanup and the ratio, all of that becomes more difficult when you're looking at bio-based feedstocks. But it's critical that this technology must be commercialized because we have vast feedstock resources that other technologies cannot readily utilize. But the problem is that it's still not commercial. The first of its kind facility, Fulcrum, using MSW, closed down earlier this year. And so that is very disappointing, but that means there's now a greater risk for this technology. But it can produce very low carbon intensity. And the alternative to Fischer-Tropsch is to produce methanol and then using the methanol to jet conversion process. The difficulty is that the capex is very high, and anything from greater than 1 billion to 4 billion US dollars. There is complexity with syngas cleanup, and there are huge differences with feedstocks. If you look at the Fulcrum facility, there wasn't a lot of information available, but one of the things was that they had 10 feet layer buildup of cement-like in their gasifier. And this is likely to be due to high ash content in MSW that can be up to 24%, and not necessarily controlling the moisture in the feedstock, which then sort of creates this environment that, you know, was problematic. They also had problems with nitric acid forming because of the feedstock characteristics. So this is very critical that you have strict feedstock specifications, not just for size, but for moisture content, and that the contaminants are removed or clearly known, so that piping and so on is the standard or the quality that can withstand the type of corrosion that you might experience. So yesterday someone asked about the yields. I said 18% distillate per ton. But this is without addition of hydrogen, because if you can add hydrogen separately and you don't need the water gas shift reaction to get the right ratio, then you can improve this. You also produce multiple products, and if we just look at straight run fractions, the jet fraction is quite low, and it can be increased as high as 70%, but then you need to put in place more hydrocracking, and every time you have a cracking process, you are producing more gases, and therefore you're reducing your liquid yield. So there's always a balance that must be achieved between those two. Then I put direct thermochemical liquefaction first. Oh, just to mention about the gasification, there's a couple of people on the webinar here that contacted me and that they are pursuing commercial scale facilities in BC and Alberta. So that's very reassuring that this is happening in Canada. So alcohol to jet, it doesn't have that much potential in Canada, but direct thermochemical liquefaction does. And this is three basic processes: fast pyrolysis, catalytic pyrolysis, and hydrothermal liquefaction. And at UBC, we've been looking at this process and thought this is has a lot of potential as far back as I think 2014, and we've done various projects funded by Boeing to look at this. You produce this liquid intermediate and then you have to upgrade it. So the liquid intermediate, I think you're probably not seeing my pointer. The liquid intermediate, this is for fast pyrolysis at commercial level, HTL not quite there, but it's this part that's the problem, the upgrading, because of the complexity of the oils. It's quite difficult, catalyst inhibition and coking and so on. But what is important also is that this can be a logical next step for co-processing because you have a bio-based intermediate. But the problem is it's not ASTM approved yet, but it has significant potential. And if you look at hydrothermal liquefaction, it can use niche feedstocks and so on. And as we talked yesterday as well, the waste tire pyrolysis oil, which is in the process for approval for co-processing for SAF production. And the other thing that, one of the things with some of these first of a kind type of facility is how do you make money while you are trying to optimize the process? And biochar is becoming really big for carbon credits, which could have a lot of potential. But as I said, there's still significant potential or technical challenges with the high oxygen content, low pH, water content, high nitrogen, high hydrogen requirements for upgrading. But if we look at Preem, for example, they have been co-processing fast pyrolysis bio-oils from the Pyrocell facility based on the BTG technology. And they're putting that in the fluid catalytic cracker. Still not optimized, but they also started co-processing waste tire pyrolysis oil. And because it doesn't have the high oxygen content, it seems to be easier. But for the moment, most bio oils are being used as a heating oil replacement because you don't need high quality product. And there's also significant interest to use it for marine shipping fuel because the engines can also tolerate lower quality fuels. The alcohol to jet, I'm just briefly going to refer to this. As we know, you get alcohol produced from lots of crops, which is fully commercial. Cellulosic ethanol, yesterday I spoke about that, and that's, struggling to be economically viable at a commercial scale. And then there's a third way of producing ethanol, which is waste gas or syngas fermentation, the LanzaTech process. And there are multiple types of alcohols that have been approved, but ethanol is the sort of main one that is being pursued. There are, GEVO, the isobutanol process, the Swedish biofuels mixed alcohol process, and also Global Bioenergies, the butene, isobutene process. So there are multiple options there, but the commercialization so far is mainly looking at ethanol to jet. But butanol and methanol is also in the pipeline, and this, could open up, because methanol would logically come from a gasification syngas, or it can come from biogas to methanol to jet. So that gives it different kinds of options. Methanol is also, considered for shipping. There are already engines that can operate on methanol. So, there are different fuel options for these. So when we look at the alcohol to jet commercialization, we know that the LanzaJet Freedom Pines facility, so the official opening was January last year, but they still only completed construction, I think, in September last year. But they're still in the commissioning phase. I think I read just in the last few days that they are starting to produce small volumes of fuel, but they are taking the commissioning stages slowly in order to make sure that everything is working properly. But if you just take the alcohol to jet part, the SAF, ICAO SAF rules of thumb show you that it's significantly lower capex than, say, gasification. And ultimately, doesn't matter where the ethanol comes from, it's all chemically identical and can be used. There are also established supply chains, and also what I mentioned yesterday, that sugarcane ethanol has a very low carbon intensity. So most of these alcohol to jet processes can produce anything from 70 to 90% SAF fraction, but they can also tailor it to produce more diesel fraction and also more naphtha, depending on the processing and depending on the economics and the market. The challenge really with alcohol to jet is this availability and cost of second generation advanced alcohols, because this is not sufficiently commercial. As I mentioned yesterday, only Horizon in Brazil is producing commercial scale cellulosic ethanol from bagasse. So that's really what we need to look at, and where we need to make progress. My study in India recently highlighted that the vast majority of the feedstock available in India is rice straw, and they can produce more than enough SAF for all of India's jet fuel consumption, and then export more. But the critical thing is getting the cellulosic ethanol from rice straw to become commercial, because it's even more difficult than from bagasse. The LanzaTech process, they either directly use industrial off gases, say from steel mill, which is their main demonstration, but they can also take a feedstock, use gasification to produce a syngas, and then ferment the syngas. So they are looking at various options, and in India, there's a small facility currently that was opened at the Indian oil refinery, where the LanzaTech facility is fermenting the refinery off gases. Then, as I said, also methanol from biogas and so on. So, yeah, and then power to liquids. So this is still under development, and only small scale volumes are being produced. The high cost is quite significant. I think a recent study in Europe indicated that E-SAF, as they call it, is probably about production cost of 8,000 euros, which means that if a fuel supplier does not comply with the mandates, they will be paying over 13,000 euros in penalties. And that compared to a HEFA market price at the moment of, say, 2,000 to 2,300 US dollars. So there's a significant price difference, which is why most of the interest in developing this is either within the European region or facilities who want to sell into the European region. There is a possibility that they're looking at hydrogen production in remote areas and then shipping or piping that into Europe. You can even, there's a facility in Chile that produces methanol, which can then be shipped into Europe, and then the methanol is acting as a hydrogen carrier, and then they can produce the hydrogen there to supply, renewable hydrogen combined with CO for E-SAF production. So there's a lot of options, but expensive and still not at a commercial scale. But the benefit is really that it doesn't require bio-based feedstocks. But, the high emission reductions, we have to look at where does the CO2 come from? Where does the electricity come from? And is it truly additional renewable electricity? And, there's substantial demand for renewable electricity already, not just for electric vehicles, but for decarbonizing the grid and, data centers. So I'm running a little bit late. So ASTM certification, I'm just quickly going to go through this. We know that there are two ASTM relevant standards. NEET-SAF is under ASTM D5 7566, and conventional jet fuel and co-processing is under D1655. And there are blending limits and so on. And the SAF, NEET-SAF is not identical, but once it's been blended, it is essentially identical. So I'm just going to jump ahead. So we have a basic composition of conventional jet fuel, and then we have specific properties. So the SAF blend does not necessarily have to have an identical chemical composition. It's more that it has to be fit for purpose, so functionally identical in meeting their specific properties. And that's the SAF blend, not the NEET-SAF. The NEET-SAF might not meet all of those, but once it's blended, it has to meet the same specifications. So the ASTM approval is really about the safety and operability of the fuel, but ASTM does not actually tell you what is commercial or what is sustainable. But of course, a company can't get market access unless there is ASTM approval. So if we just look at the process for certification, there's a very rigorous process that is described in ASTM D4054. I'm not going to go into that, but it's very comprehensive, and the initial SAF products pathways that were approved took years and years and years before it was ASTM approved, because there's obviously a caution due to safety issues. The approval process has these 4 different tiers and different phases, and OEMs are involved in testing and so on, but it can take very, very long. And I remember, the GEVO process, the isobutanol to jet actually cost them something like 25 million US dollars to do this. But there's been a lot of improvement since then. And so this is some of the conversion processes currently under evaluation. I'm not going to go into detail, but as you can see here, pyrolysis of non-recyclable plastics, co-processing of the used tire pyrolysis oil, methanol to jet. So there's a lot of pathways that are in the process with the lead developers, but it is a slow process because there's only so many people that do these evaluations. But you know, there's a lot of improvements, speeding up some of the initial testing. And there's also a fast track process uh, that allows very short, I think the shortest is like 18 months, where you can get fast track approval, although the blend then must be limited to 10%. But part of the reason there's one fast track process that was approved, part of the reason is that it was still a type of lipid. So it, you know, depending on the complexity of the chemistry of the feedstock and the fuel, that will also delay how fast you can certify this. Now, the blending process, this diagram explains it clearly. So the neat SAF, and I think this is still a diagram from Sky Energy, the neat SAF has to be certified under ASTM 7566, the specific annex. Then it has to be blended with fossil fuel jet that is certified under ASTM D1655. Then the SAF blend is then qualified under Table 1 of D7566 and then automatically becomes approved under 1655. So when you get to this stage, the blend is absolutely identical and indistinguishable as far as the properties are concerned from conventional jet fuel. And that's important to understand. You cannot distinguish anymore. It's absolutely identical. But when we talk about fuel certification, but then there is also quality standards along the whole pathway to the airport. And here what we also have is different standards, such as on a global basis, you have the Joint Inspection Group standards and so on, that ensure quality control at various stages, and there will be differences for different countries, but at each stage, a certificate of analysis must be produced. And this is also relevant in terms of Canadian airports and how the transport is going to take place and testing along the way to make sure that the quality, it's meeting the specifications even after transport, for example. And the standards that apply, for example, mainly I'm focusing on the JIG standards because that is applicable globally with some variations. So you have the JIG 1, which is for refueling, JIG 2 for storage at the airport. This other one, rules to be followed in depots and refineries. So that is along the whole supply chain. And then in Canada, you have the standard for storage, handling, and dispensing of fuel at aerodromes. So just to make you aware of those standards. And then SAF at the airport. So ultimately, we want this to be a cost-effective process. Every single part of the process that we can reduce the cost of the SAF is critical. So the SAF blend can be inserted into the fuel tank farm after it's been approved under ASTM 1655655, but the neat SAF can never be inserted into the fuel tank farm. If the SAF, neat SAF or a SAF blend is segregated, it can be delivered into one aircraft only. This is usually just done for demonstration flights, but ultimately we want the SAF blend to go into the fuel tank farm. Now, the blending locations. So because the whole supply chain changes with SAF production, you are not producing the SAF near the refinery, petroleum refinery, or you producing it close to the feedstock. So if you are producing, say, SAF in northern BC, you are not going to transport conventional jet fuel there to blend it and then transport the blend. You are probably going to transport the neat SAF and then blend along the supply chain. And of course, the cost, volume, etc., the location, existing infrastructure, all of that must be taken into account. But this is applicable that you cannot blend within the airport fuel storage depot. It must be upstream of the airport fuel storage depot. So what this means from a Canadian perspective is that there has to probably be established blending infrastructure at close to airports in order to optimize the cost. If there is the opportunity, of course, for a refinery to purchase the SAF, blend it at the refinery and pipe it into the hydrant system or the fuel tank farm, of course that is suitable. But we can't sort of preempt all of these different ways that the market will be selling and transporting. And I'm just going to quickly show you, of course, this is, I think, logical that we want to have the most economical transport, which would be by pipeline, then ship, rail, and tanker, with tanker being the most expensive with the highest carbon intensity. So it all depends on the distance and so on, and your existing supply chains and flexibility. And there are lots of pipelines everywhere, but a lot of pipelines only transport crude. Some pipelines will transport different types of products, but what we have to realize is you cannot transport neat SAF in a pipeline. So it has to be transported, blended, and then it can be transported by pipeline. But of course, if you have multiple products, there will be some mixing, and therefore some of that will have to be reprocessed. But completely new pipelines will have to be developed, or supply chains, because it's likely that SAF production will be distant locations from existing supply. So this is just some multi-product pipelines, just showing shipping is, of course, very low carbon intensity and is already used. There are some river and barge routes, and jet fuel is supplied along some of these routes already. Rail is playing an important role for feedstock supply already, but if you are transporting jet fuel or SAF blends, usually you must have dedicated rail cars to avoid any kind of contamination. Canada has over 200 medium to large airports. Now, we cannot probably deliver to all of those airports, but we will have to, as blends become higher and higher, we may not be able to just deliver to the larger airports. And there's also then the option of book and claim. I'm not going to go into that in detail because I'm running late, but there's a little bit here of current supplies at the airports. And then what is book and claim? And it's basically that you separate the physical fuel from the sustainability characteristics, which means you can put the physical fuel into an airport, but use the sustainability in another place. So Air Canada or WestJet can buy fuel in Los Angeles and claim it at Toronto Airport or Calgary Airport. That's basically. So that's all. You can look at the slides afterwards, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take it. And please feel free to email me afterwards if you I'm just going to share that again so you can take down the
Yeah. And you can also put in the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Susan. We do have some questions for you. First one, if ASTM is not an indication of sustainability, can ISCC be such an indication?
Yeah, as I mentioned in the webinar yesterday, if we're talking about SAF and international aviation, CORSIA has approved 3 different sustainability verification bodies, ISCC, RSB, and Class NK. So sustainability verification has to take place through those organizations.
Great. And Jean-Hugues just wanted to basically make a comment saying co-processing does not produce SAF and it produces low carbon aviation fuel.
Actually, it's not true, but we'll have that argument another time.
Okay. All right. Maybe he can send you an email.
It's a constant discussion, so I will talk to him later.
Okay. Okay. The other question we had was co-processing seems like a low-cost solution to reduce emissions from aviation using existing infrastructure. What are the limitations to this approach that justify standalone SAF refineries?
Sorry, can you just...
It's in the Q&A. It's the second one from the bottom. From Eric.
Eric. Sorry, I think some people went to Q&A. Can you just read it for me again? Sorry.
Yeah. Co-processing seems like a low-cost solution to reduce emissions with existing infrastructure. What are the limitations to this approach that justify standalone SAF refineries?
Oh, the first one is, of course, that you can currently only co-process at 5%. And yeah, it depends on the specific refinery configuration as well. Some refineries are not necessarily suitable for co-processing and production of SAF.
Okay,
I don't know if that answers the question.
We have another one here. Just as an example, the biodiesel plant at Hamilton, Ontario, recently acquired by HEFA Ports. Can it work for co-processing? I'm not sure if the question is too specific.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Can maybe send in an email there, Hang. Okay, and then we had a little bit of clarification. You mentioned the 8,000 euros.
Oh, yeah, it's a specific report that was published by EASA earlier this year, done by ICF as well, because the whole thing with the Refuel EU mandate is that if a fuel supplier is not supplying according to the mandate, the penalty that is payable is the difference between the production cost of the SAF minus the production cost of conventional jet fuel times 2. So they had to calculate what those penalties would be like. And so that's where the calculations come from. If you email me, I can send you the report.
Okay, thanks for that. Are there currently Canadian producers of SAF certified fully from tier 1 to 4 for HEFA by ASTM?
Well, I don't think there are Canadian companies that have done their own ASTM certification pathway, but the one who's closest to producing SAF is Tidewater Renewables, although they're currently just producing renewable diesel with the HEFA pathway. But they have everything in place to increase and start producing SAF if they build additional infrastructure.
Okay, do we have a strategic advantage to produce hydrogen with our hydropower capacity?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Given that SAF is often more expensive to traditional jet fuels, what would be your recommendations to improve profitability of SAF implementation and uptake? Implantation, sorry, and uptake.
Well, I think the production cost is probably going to stay more expensive than conventional jet fuel for the next few decades, and some reports indicate that even by 2050 it might not be at parity. But the first thing is to commercialize the technologies, because the technologies that are not commercial can use low-cost feedstocks. But improvement in production costs cannot happen until you have a facility that is operating at scale, and then you can optimize it and try and improve it. So cost reductions only start really once you've got a first commercial scale, because they could be, depending on the technology, you could get a 20% reduction in production cost over time, but it only starts when you actually have your first commercial facility. And for power to liquids, they say the potential for reducing the production cost is the biggest, because the biggest cost component really is the renewable electricity, and that operates on a different basis in terms of cost coming down over time compared to, say, gasification, where you have massive infrastructure that you build. So even if you can optimize it, it's just taking much longer to actually bring the costs down. And costs really across the whole supply chain. So optimizing feedstock cost, optimizing supply chain costs, optimizing production cost, and then getting it to the airport and into the airplane. So every part of that supply chain has to be optimized from a cost perspective.
Okay. I think that was the end of the questions. There was just one other comment saying,
Oh, there's Len. Can I answer Len?
yes, for the fulcrum.
He says, it's my opinion that fulcrum failed due to MSW feedstock, so different than employing woody biomass. Not necessarily, Len. As I said, yes, MSW has much bigger ash content, but if you start working with hog fuel and needles and stuff, the ash content also starts going up dramatically, and the issue of drying. So if you don't control the moisture in your woody biomass feedstock, the tar formation combined with the ash, it might not be as bad as what fulcrum experienced, but again, it can be similar, and a lot of it is feedstock, but it's also how they started. If you can't get the right temperatures and you have the tar formation, it's still going to happen. And that's why I'm saying wood pellets, because you have a very clear moisture content, you have a very clear ash content. It's a very controlled feedstock environment.
All right. Well, we've come up to 12 o'clock here. Thank you again so much, Susan. I think we've had a good, 2 successful webinars, a lot of interest generated. And thank you to all of you for participating today, your questions and your comments. So we will be sending the recording and the slides to all the registrants, and we will have it on our website as well. So thank you and have a great day.